Hey, what's going on? Today I'm going to be modeling an iPhone 12 Pro in Blender. I just want to make it clear that this is not a tutorial. Of course, the first step is to delete the default cube. So the idea is to use a reference image to make a model. So I changed the geometry a little bit so it matches the reference image. Since of course this is a 3D model, I added some thickness to it with the solidify modifier. This year's iPhone bezel is a lot sharper. So what I did was I added a bevel modifier and reduced the amount, and also kept the segments down. The corners of the iPhone is curved, like a lot. So I applied the solidify modifier so I get the geometry and selected all the edges. Now that the edges were selected, I used the bevel option using Command B or Control B if you're in Windows. And then I use the mouse wheel so it increases the segment, so it creates a curved bevel, like that. This is looking good for my first attempt. I brought in another reference image, but this one is facing upwards. My goal was to model the notch, but in order to do that, I needed the edges of the display. So I selected the face of the model and inset it by clicking I on the keyboard. Time to model the notch. For this step, what I did was I subdivided the edge. This created more points. I used these points to mimic the shape of the notch. Now that the shape is underway, all I had to do was bevel the corners. Next up, I had to model the buttons. The lock button, the volume up and down, and the ringer. I added a new plane and tried to model using the same techniques. I tried beveling the corners, but it was just not working. So what I did was I added a subsurf division modifier. To customize the smoothness, I used loop cuts. Pretty simple. Next, I took the button and put it on the edge where it belongs. Of course, the button has some thickness to it, so I added solidify, gave it the appropriate thickness, and I accurately aligned it to the edge. I repeated the process on the other side of the model as well. This side was pretty easy because all I had to do was copy and paste it on the other side. For the ringer, I had to make some modifications, but other than that, that's about it. The ringer toggle button is placed in a cavity inside the iPhone. To create that hole, all I did was add a boolean modifier to the main model and use a picker to select the object. You can use this technique with any object to create a certain hole in the model. I hid away the other model that was creating the hole, and now it's looking like a ringer. I repeated the same process for the SIM card holder. I duplicated the object that was creating the cavity and then scaled it down so it was looking like it fit inside the cavity. Next up, I needed to model the hole which is used to open the SIM card holder. So I repeated the same boolean process to create a hole inside the model. Next, I needed to model the charging port. So I added a reference image. Since everything on an iPhone is modeled the same way, I just copied the same process. So I duplicated the lock button and placed it on the bottom. I increase the thickness of the object to the appropriate length so I can use the Boolean modifier to carve out the charging port. And there we go. That's looking good. Next up, I had to model the speaker in the notch. So as always, I had to create an object so I can use the Boolean modifier to carve out the hole. Next, I placed the object at the appropriate place. Changed up the scale a little bit so it matches the reference image. The depth seems about right. Next up, I added a Boolean modifier to the main model. And there we go. Hide that. Yep, now it's looking like a real iPhone. I'd completely forgotten about the backside, so I started modeling the camera. In the back of the iPhone, there's a weird platform on which the camera sits. So first I modeled that. I used the same technique of using a subsurface division modifier and using loop cuts afterwards. Next, I added some thickness to this. The platform thing on the iPhone has a slope to it. So what I did was I scaled down the top a little bit. For the camera, all I did was add a cylinder. There's a bezel on the top of the camera, so in order to make that, I inset the face, and then inset it again, and push it down. After that, I just duplicated it twice. There we go. For the rest of the details, I'm going to be using shaders and textures, and that's going to come out in part 2 of this video. So make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.